Hello, race fans, and welcome back to the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast. Thanks again for coming back, and we're super excited for this week's episode because we get to sit down with a couple of guys that kind of paved the way for this very podcast. They are host of a podcast that was an inspiration for ours, and we got to get on the phone with them for a nice long conversation today, Jacob.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not very often you can interview the people that are normally doing the interviews.
Yeah, so today's podcast is a podcast within a podcast with four podcasters.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a mega cast.
A mega cast, there you go. So before we get into that, you were at Waynesfield last week.
Right, so we had the Bob Hampshire Classic last Saturday at Waynesfield Raceway Park, a.k.a. the field. There were approximately 101 cars in the pits between the Fast Series Wing 410s, the Boss non-wing 410s, and the, I think they call them like the USAC Midwest Thunder D2 midgets versus ASMA 600 or 1000cc non-wing micro sprints, whatever they are. They look the same, but yeah, about 100 cars in the pits there. We had the fast race was excellent as always. Waynesfield always produces great racing. We had it was quite the battle for 50 laps, or at least the first 25 laps between Cap Henry and some guy named Christopher Bell. Christopher started, I think, about 8th or 10th, and within the first 10 laps he was challenging for the lead, and Cap Henry gave him everything he could handle. And then Christopher had some issues at the halfway point with lap traffic and spun out, ended up falling back to about 11th before charging his way back up, which handed Cap Henry the lead. But then he had to deal with Skylar G., who was looking to get his first Ohio win, his second 410 win ever, actually. And it was Skylar who ended up holding off Cap. Cap literally gave him everything he had, but just wasn't quite enough, and Skylar picked up his second win. And the non-wing race, we had Cody Gardner win. It was his second ever win in a sprint car, his first one coming in July at Waynesfield at the Jack Hewitt Classic. So Mr. Gardner there went 2 for 2 at Waynesfield this year, picking up his first 2 wins.
So quite a few of those 410 cars went on to race with the Outlaws the next day.
Right. We saw quite a few of those guys.
Christopher Bell was there. G went on.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty big weekend. What was the car count?
It was about 38 or 39 for the wings and 32, 33 for the non-wing guys, and the rest made up by those midgets and mini sprints.
So a big event there. This weekend in Portsmouth is the Dirt Track World Championship with the late models. Always a huge event. We mentioned it a little bit last week on the podcast, but that's coming up here for your weekend dirt track racing in Ohio. So with that update, I think we're going to roll right into our conversation here. Today we were very excited to get on the phone with Wece and Justin Fiedler from the World of Outlaws official podcast, Open Red. And here's our conversation with those two guys. All right, so we are here on the phone with Wece and Justin Fiedler from Open Red. Man, we are very excited to be talking to you guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. Why are you excited to talk to us? We're not really anybody important.
No, come on, man. Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, you guys are literally the reason that we're doing what we do. We were just talking about it before you got on the phone here. I remember an episode over a year ago when you guys were talking about other dirt track podcasts, and you were saying, we want other people to do it. It's good for the sport. We're not in competition. And I was driving in my car in Ashland, Ohio, and I thought to myself, okay, I'll go do that. And so here we are. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like, I've said it before and I will continue to say it. Like, there's plenty of space for all of us to exist. And, people have even made comments to us about us and Wing Nation and things like that. And it's like, first of all, we have very different show styles. They're doing very different things than we're doing. And having more dirt racing content is never going to be a bad thing. Like, we want people to be able to, get different bits and pieces of things they like, whether it's sprint car racing or late models or modifieds or, whether you're in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or California, wherever you are. Like, I mean, there's no reason why there shouldn't be a very vast landscape of dirt racing podcasts, and we will absolutely support that down to the very end.
And that's the beauty of podcasting, I think, is that it's not it's not like over-the-air TV that's appointment viewing. Sure, there's an episode that goes out on Monday or Tuesday every week, but you can listen to Open Red today and the Ohio Dirt Track podcast tomorrow, and then Wing Nation the next day, and you can keep up with it at your own leisure. So that takes even more of the competition side out of it, because it's there at any time for someone to take in and listen to.
And, before we started this podcast, I did a lot of that. I had you guys and Wing Nation and Dirt Nerds on rotation. And then when I started the podcast, and Jacob and I started doing this, it got to the point to me, like, how much dirt track racing can I put into my life? Do you feel that way, Jacob?
Oh, yeah. Dirt track racing is approximately 87% of my life.
What are you wasting the other 13% on?
12% goes to my girlfriend, and the other % goes to my cats. So
okay, fair enough.
Very little sleep.
Very little. I don't sleep. I just nap.
The man will. We're about 90 miles from Eldora.
Yeah, depending on how fast we go.
So multiple times this year, Jacob has made the trip to Eldora, come back, and been at work at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Usually about 7, 8 o'clock, but every now and then I'm there pretty early.
Very dedicated.
Brutal.
So I wanted to ask you guys, at what point did you guys start? Where did the idea come from? 175 episodes ago, or whatever, or approximately whatever it's been. Where did the idea for Open Red come from, and from moment one?
I believe the initial idea was Justin's. I believe we were sitting at lunch one day here in the office. What was that, summer 2016 we started? Like 2016 Kings Royal?
2016.
I think Justin kind of pitched it at lunch one day, and then I'll kind of let him take the story from there. But he kind of took the idea to some of our bosses higher up here at World Racing Group, and it kind of went from there. It was kind of one of those things where it's like, we would go and it would be me and Ross and Brian Dunlap, our director of broadcast services, and, any number of other people would be just sitting at lunch shooting the breeze about things. And, it was where the initial idea of Ross running the Chili Bowl came from. And it was just one of those things where it was like, we sit around, we have these conversations. And the other thing that I felt like we were kind of missing content-wise, just as a whole, is like there hasn't really been a great way to follow the World of Outlaws, like kind of season long. Like, we do a lot of stuff about each individual race, but we hadn't really done a whole lot about a season as a whole. And it was just kind of a combination of those things. And I went initially to, one of our bosses here and was like, hey, I think we should do a podcast. I'm not really sure what it looks like. And I said, I don't know if that's like Johnny Gibson maybe doing interviews on a weekly basis. I said, I don't know if that's me and Ross being assholes. Like, I'm not really sure. And she says, I like you and Ross being assholes. That sounds like fun. So, she was like, how quickly can you get this together? Like, next week? And we were like, well, let's we need a couple of weeks here to kind of get ourselves together. And that was kind of the start of it. And honestly, the show evolved. Those very early episodes are short and brutal and a little rough to listen to. And there's not as many guests. Obviously, now every week we have a guest. So, we've kind of learned as we've gone what works and what doesn't work. And I think we're probably at least a little bit better than we used to be at this whole thing.
So you guys are over 175 episodes deep. What's been like the hardest thing that you guys have come across being so far into this?
I'm not sure. We've certainly had, we went for a long time where we didn't have a no for a podcast guest. We've had a few no's now over the course of this. And it's for various reasons. some people we've even asked multiple times to be on the show, and they've told us no multiple times. But I feel like, for the most part, in terms of getting guests and stuff, in the beginning, it's like, hey, you have to explain who you are and what you're doing. And the beauty of it now is we don't have to do that. We call up and say, or we text, or we send a Twitter DM, and we say, hey, we want to know if you want to be on Open Red. And they're like, yeah, great. When can we do it? That's 99.9% of our interactions. Other than that, the technical stuff has been fairly seamless. We have, a studio here in our office that Ross keeps up very nicely, and we've got some fairly decent equipment, and we've got support from the people above us, and I'm not really sure that we've had any super real difficulties. Ross, can you think of anything?
No, not really. Everything's like you said. That early on, having to explain to every person you reached out to what you were trying to do became a little tedious. But once this thing really kind of grew some legs and took off, it started explaining itself, and people knew ahead of time what you were doing when you reached out to them. So it certainly got easier over time.
Yeah, I think you guys made it easier for us, because when we reach out, you guys kind of paved the way, and some of the drivers and crew members or whoever we talk to, I think they got used to this experience between you guys and Wing Nation, and then we come along, and it's been a little quicker to get to yes. I think one of our biggest challenges was not duplicating what you guys are doing. We listened to specifically the interviews, like we've had, Larson and Schatz and Kendra, and I went back and listened to those. So try not to ask the same questions that you guys asked if you've already done it. So.
No, I think that's the beauty of this is, even, with the longer format that we have as a podcast, we're never going to be able to get to everything. We've had guys on, at this point, multiple times now. We've had Brad Sweet on a couple of times. We've had Christopher Bell on a couple of times. And you can have very different conversations with them each time, depending on what you want to focus on. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it is if you want to pick a certain aspect of, their career, or if you want to talk about something specific, like, we had the Greg Wilson and Shane Stewart on just to talk specifically about what it meant to drive a sprint car. I think there's other conversations you can find to have with people, and I think that's kind of the beauty of this whole thing.
I want to talk really quickly about you guys have a lot going on, with World Racing Group, between the different sanctioning bodies that you guys have, the different circuits, and you have Dirt Vision. Talk about can you tell me a little bit about all the entities that you guys have? You're spread across with the video and the websites.
World Racing Group as a whole, obviously, there's the World of Outlaws Nos Drink Sprint Car Series, the Martin Buildings Late Model Series, the Super Dirt Car Series, Big Block Modifieds. Then Dirt Vision is involved in some capacity in all of those properties. We also do we did this past year for the first time on Dirt Vision the whole schedule at the Knoxville Raceway, plus the Knoxville Nationals and all of that. Dirt Vision this off season, or this during winter. I don't use the word off season anymore because that's a myth. But this winter, Dirt Vision is doing showing all this racing from Australia as well. So really, Dirt Vision now is a 12-month entity. Like there is no off season for Dirt Vision. There is racing year round now that is getting shown there. And then I'll let Justin speak to his side of things on the websites, but those guys have a seemingly never-ending list of website tasks they are performing.
Yeah, we what was kind of a department of one. I have kind of been the digital department for World Racing Group here for the last 5 or 6 years, and just here in the last year I've added some help in a guy named Chris Owens. But the two of us now, I feel like in terms of all of the kind of different things we do here, like we're probably the only two people in the entire company that have our hands in literally every aspect of what this company does. And, whether it's the two World of Outlaws series, the big blocks in the Northeast, we've got the dirt car sanctioning, we're doing, dirt car members, Dirt Vision. All of these different things that we're into, like we either have sites or social media accounts or something for all of this, and we keep expanding out and doing more and more and more, and even to the point within the last couple of years, I've built a point system for our dirt car tracks in the Midwest, where all of our results and all the regional and national points are coming out of that, and obviously the expansion here, like Ross mentioned, of Dirt Vision, and now we're kind of have been doing a lot of upgrading here the last year. Obviously, you've seen a new World of Outlaws website. We saw some people talking about it yesterday on Twitter. back and forth with me was like, we've done a new Summer Nationals website, we've done a new Super Dirt Week website, we'll have a new Super Dirt Car Series website out soon, a new worldracinggroup.com website. I mean, like, we're basically upgrading literally everything we have. We're upgrading, to better hosting platforms and all this kind of stuff, and so it's like, it kind of is a never-ending, cycle of things to do. As soon as we get finished with one thing, we're moving on to the next, and then it's like you kind of rotating back around. But I mean, World Racing Group is obviously a company that has an interest in a lot of different things, and some stuff maybe you don't even know about. But I mean, even outside of that, the Super Dirt Weeks and Dirt Car Nationals and Summer Nationals and Modified Nationals,